So let's get going. Welcome everyone to the launch event to mark the publication of the Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit, or the TAWS Toolkit as it's affectionately known. The panel and I are delighted to see so many of you here in this lovely virtual room. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers this afternoon, and I'll be introducing everyone as we go along, and we'll soon get started. My name is Fera, and I'm CEO of the Tree Council, which is a national charity that brings everyone together for the love of trees. Our work spans community planting, a national network of volunteer tree wardens, a national schools programme, National Hedgerow Week, National Tree Week, and of course our science and research programme with government and leading universities. But the toolkit that we're here to introduce today is all about partnership. Its development has been a real team effort, and the Tree Council team is delighted to have played a role in helping bring it to fruition. We'd like to thank all those who've contributed their support and their vital insights. So it's a big thank you to Defra, to Fera Science, to Forest Research and the Forestry Commission, who've collectively created this much needed toolkit. Thanks to the many organisations representing the tree sector, and most importantly, thank you to all the brilliant local authorities who've given their precious time and shared their hard-won successes and insights. I think local authorities have a unique and critical leadership role to play for the nation's trees and woodlands. This toolkit showcases your work and provides you and others with a very useful, practical resource. It's great that the toolkit is now published, and we'll hear more in a moment from our speakers and about why we need a strategic approach to managing trees and woodlands and how the toolkit can help us all do that. We're also going to outline the ongoing programme of support and research that we'll all be going on together learning as a community. And I'm going to ask now for the agenda slide just to come up. This is a very brief overview, so you can see the outline of this afternoon's session in two parts. The first part is why we need TAWS, and the second practical part is introducing the toolkit itself. Slide down, and now it's my honour to introduce our first three speakers who are going to share their thoughts in turn. They'll answer questions at the end from the Q&A box, and the running order will be as follows. We'll be talking to Naomi Matheson, Director of the England Tree Planting Programme, followed by Nicola Spence, Defra's Chief Plant Health Officer, and then followed finally by Carolyn Mackenzie, Director for the Environment at Surrey County Council. So I'm going to say now, over panelists, we'll all turn off our cameras, and over to you, Naomi.
Thank you, Sarah. And as Sarah said, I'm director of we call it the Nature for Climate Tree Programme now. I'm also responsible for trees and forestry policy in general at Defra. And I've been doing that role with my job share partner, Bella Murphy, for over 2 years now. And I'm really excited actually to be talking to this local authority audience today. And I feel like probably haven't had the opportunity to speak to so many local authority representatives before. And it's been a real journey that central government in Defra has come on trees and forestry over the last 2 and a bit years. And I hope that at a local level, you're starting to see and feel some of the impacts of that. So the publication of this Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit is a key commitment that was made in our England Trees Action Plan that we published in 2021. So that was kind of the start of setting out much more clearly what central government wants to aim to do on trees and forestry. And this is the next step on that journey towards realising that ambition to transform England's treescape. So what has become more and more clear to me as I've gone through this journey is just understanding how critical it is for central and local government to work hand in hand to enable us to meet those commitments that we've set out in our action plan on increasing tree planting and getting more woodlands and trees into management. And at every turn, it's just become clear what a critical role local authorities play, and also how many local authorities we're hearing making commitments about wanting to increase tree planting in their areas for the multiple benefits that it can bring. And as local leaders, you're absolutely best placed to engage and empower your communities to drive that activity at local level and make the most of those benefits that trees offer to your communities, be that contributing to landscape connectivity, providing ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration and flood protection, supporting job creation and economic growth, and also having really profound positive impacts on people and biodiversity. And the research that's been done recently on impacts on people's well-being is incredibly compelling. So the new Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit is a key addition to the existing offer of support for local authorities, and I really welcome its publication and thank everyone who's been involved in developing it. So with our partners, we developed the toolkit with the intention of providing a step-by-step guide on how to create an effective long-term strategy to expand and enhance and protect your local treescapes and realise those benefits of trees that I just set out. And the aim really is just to help you to be as strategic as possible about managing and planting trees at a local level, ensuring that the right trees are planted in the right place and for the right reasons, supporting your net zero and environmental ambitions whilst addressing the needs of your communities. And the local tree and woodland strategies will also complement and support biodiversity net gain and local nature recovery strategies, as well as local and neighbourhood plans. So I'd encourage all of you to try and seize the opportunity to develop or renew your local tree and woodland strategies. But I am really, really aware that resources are very stretched and there are many asks on local authorities. And so that's why the role that my team is playing in central government to provide support for the costs of planting and management, and also to help boost your capacity to plan and deliver it, is so important. And I hope that all of you have some kind of awareness of what that offer is, but I'm just going to very briefly, before I hand over, set out some of the bones of it. So we're currently supporting local authority tree planting through several of the Nature for Climate Fund grant schemes, most notably the Local Authority Treescape Fund and the Urban Tree Challenge Fund, which in this financial year saw about 184,000 trees planted with the help of those funds. Both schemes are currently closed, but they're going to reopen for applications early this year. And that will then be open on a rolling basis, so you can apply at any time of year. And for the next financial year, we'll be making about 4.5 million available through the Local Authority Treescapes Fund. And we're also extending the Urban Trees Challenge Fund over the next 2 years with up to 6 million available for new planting, plus the maintenance payments that will help ensure those trees survive. And then also, something which really seeks to address the challenge that we've heard from you about not having sufficient capacity to plan and plant and manage those woodlands. Our new £9.8 million Woodland Creation Accelerator Fund is providing financial support to allow local authorities to increase their capacity and specialist skills to really enable that ramp up in tree planting and woodland creation delivery. And I hope that some of you have been successful in getting funding through that route. Then there are two other areas to highlight. So one is investment that we provided, £2 million of investment to the government's Levelling Up Parks Fund. The whole fund is bigger than that, but we've specifically invested £2 million to support the creation of improved parks in urban areas, but specifically to support trees as part of that. And then we also have offers, grant offers available for larger scale planting opportunities. So if you're in an area where there are those larger scale planting opportunities, the England Woodland Creation Offer and the Forestry England leasehold schemes might also be available for you to get funding for those schemes. And so all these schemes alongside the Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit will add to and help maintain the hundreds of thousands of trees in our local communities, towns and cities. So that's all I was going to say today, but I'm really keen to take questions as part of the Q&A once we've heard from the other speakers. Thank you again to everyone involved in the development of the toolkit, the Tree Council, Fera Science and Forestry Research, as well as my own policy team. Thank you to all the local authorities for their support with the development of the toolkit. And a special thanks to Sarah and the team for hosting today's event. So I think I'm handing over now to Nicola Spence, Defra's Chief Plant Health Officer.
Thanks very much, Naomi. And as Defra's Chief Plant Health Officer, I'm delighted to see the publication of this Trees and Woodland Strategy Toolkit for local authorities. I have responsibility for tree health, not only policy, but also operations as the Defra Chief Plant Health Officer. So it's particularly important that we're launching this today. I'd also like to thank everyone involved, particularly the Tree Council, Fera Science Limited and Forest Research, as well as all the local authorities who supported the research behind the development of the toolkit and provided all the wonderful case studies that really bring the toolkit to life. In Defra, we're very keen to see as many local authorities as possible developing and renewing their local trees and woodland strategies, seizing this opportunity to think big and think long term and build effective local partnerships to expand, enhance and protect their treescapes. And I do recognise the importance of strategic and long-term planning if we are to protect our trees and safeguard the multiple benefits they deliver to our communities. Last week, Defra, in partnership with the Forestry Commission and the Scottish and Welsh governments, published the Plant Biosecurity Strategy for Great Britain. This sets out a 5-year vision and a series of actions to protect plant and tree health. This sits alongside the Tree Health Resilience Strategy we published in 2018, and that brought a real new focus to helping our treescapes become more resilient to increasing pressures, not only from pests and diseases, but also from other environmental threats, such as climate change. In 2021, we also published the England Trees Action Plan, and that had a strong focus on protection, improvement, and adaptation. So developing a local strategy will enable you to integrate tree health and resilience into the long-term vision for your treescape, to set out how you will manage current and potential new threats from pests and diseases, and also how you will implement good biosecurity practice and consider adaptation as part of your tree planting and management plans. I really recognise the vital role that local authorities play in protecting the nation's trees and the need for central and local government to work together. Defra have previously funded the ash dieback and the oak processionary moth toolkits for local authorities, also published by the Tree Council, and I know they're having a really positive impact and are supporting local authorities to plan and take action in response to these particular threats. The Local Authorities Treescapes Fund and the Urban Trees Challenge Fund are also supporting tree recovery and tree planting and maintenance, particularly in trees outside woodlands, helping to ensure that we have no net loss of trees due to diseases like ash dieback. These funds stipulate that trees are sourced from suppliers that can demonstrate high biosecurity standards, and improving biosecurity will continue to be a key area of joint focus. Defra, as a member of the Plant Health Alliance, helped to develop the Plant Healthy Certification Scheme and the Plant Health Management Standard. And we are currently piloting a new biosecure procurement requirement as part of that work. Our aim, subject to the outcomes of the pilot, is that all suppliers of plants and trees under government-funded grants and contracts will need to demonstrate that they can meet the requirements set out in the Plant Health Management Standard. The ultimate aim, subject to ministerial agreement, is to roll this requirement out across all public sector planting and grant schemes and procurement. I would encourage you all to include safe sourcing and biosecure procurement practices in your trees and woodland strategies. And finally, I'd like to thank Sarah and the team at the Tree Council for hosting today's events. And I look forward to following the progress made by local authorities in embedding tree health and resilience in their woodland trees and woodland strategies. I'd now like to hand over to Carolyn Mackenzie. Carolyn is Director of Environment at Surrey County Council. Over to you, Carolyn.
Hi, afternoon. Thanks for asking me to speak. Really excited to see how far we've come with tree planting and tree establishment. I was asked to speak around why tree and woodland strategies were important. When climate emergencies were first declared, there was such a drive to plant trees and declare tree targets. And at the time, I was quite worried about how this would come to fruition. Would we actually see all these trees coming forward? In Surrey, I was previously in Kent, just not very long ago. In Surrey, we have a 1.2 million tree planting target, which, if you know Surrey, is the most wooded county in the country, and it's a significant target. And it's been, to date, we've planted around about 330,000 trees and growing this year, but it's been a really interesting journey and not without bumps. There are many issues, and I've bracketed in my chat here, and obviously lots and lots of opportunities, but there are, and there's no hiding away from it, many issues. Where to plant trees? The first few 100,000, okay, and now where do we plant the others? There's always that conflict of is it a tree or is it, you know, special landscapes and chalk downland, so trees aren't appropriate everywhere. Tree establishment or just tree planting, right tree, right place. I'm sure you've heard that phrase numerous times. Watering, especially in a drought situation. Do you plant mature trees or do you plant whips? Do you plant trees in pots? Long-term maintenance? And where does all this fit with ash dieback? And what about high-waste trees? I've got to put that in there because they're a key bit of it, but I do say it quite tongue-in-cheek and with a bit of trepidation. So it's not a smooth journey, but we are making progress. And what seemed simple on the surface is not really that simple. So having a tree strategy has allowed us to stand back a little while, because we didn't have one at the beginning, but to stand back and to take a much more strategic approach and to really look at things from all different angles. Fundamentally, it allowed us to take an evidence-based approach. Why would we plant trees there? What type of trees do we need to plant there? Why would we plant them now? Could we plant them into the future? Bringing in other evidence around. And it allows us to really focus our best efforts to get the most out of what we've got in terms of resources. And fundamentally, one of the most important things is to be transparent. Tree targets are quite political, as I'm sure you, as most local authorities know. So to actually have a transparent strategy as to where and why and how many, and is it the total amount of trees, or is it, how do you have a balance there about trees you take down? So tree strategy allows you to be transparent, but fundamentally as well, it allows you to bring in other partners and stakeholders. There are lots of people planting trees, lots of organisations, lots of communities, lots of local authorities. By having a strategy that people can buy into, we can bring people together to really make the most of that all hands to the pump, because this isn't a short term, this isn't a weekend job, this is a long-term approach. And it also allows us to look at how we maximise the benefits from it and change the conversation. Carbon is very important, but this isn't all about carbon. We've got an ecological emergency. And as previous speaker said, we've also got issues with climate change adaptation. So it's more than just carbon. And I've got a couple of ands here, and it's not just about trees. It's also about wildlife, rich, quick growing hedgerows, and having a tree strategy allows you to play that into it because they're very biodiverse and lovely to have. And it's not just about planting new trees, it's about woodland management, and you can then within a strategy encompass that as well, the conservation element. And also lastly, it's not just, and one of the things we've had to grapple with, I'm sure you have, is it's not just about planting more trees in already green areas. This is about how do we plant more trees in urban areas as well. We have a loss of tree canopy in urban areas, and especially in areas of deprivation. How do we green up communities and really bring those agendas together? So we've got tree establishment and new trees across the county, and not, as I said, in already established areas. And having a tree strategy allows us to look at that strategically and work with communities to galvanise their expertise, and tree wardens very much very valuable to this. And how do we work collectively together to get trees across the county rather than just in specific areas? So having an evidence-based strategy for me is essential. I will put one but in here though. A tree strategy, a tree establishment strategy, yes, but please, just a plea, make sure that's part of a bigger strategy, a land strategy, looking at how we manage land. So it's not just about trees, it's also linked into the nature recovery strategy, it's linked into the climate change resilience strategy, it's linked into the flooding strategy. So it's part of a bigger way of strategically approaching how we manage land, because that way we'll avoid unintended consequences, we'll avoid conflicts, but we'll also maximise numbers and essentially get those, maximise outcomes and essentially get those numbers that we're all driven by as well. So hence a strategy is key. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Carolyn. And thank you, panel, for sharing your vision for the future. It's clear how deeply you all care about the future health and development of our nation's treescapes, and also how vital it is to have finance and policy and resources and comms, and actually as well just sheer force of will to maintain the momentum and to get even more tree strategies in place. So questions have been coming in, and we've got time for just one or two before we move on to the practicalities of the toolkit. So I'm going to ask the panel to come back on camera so that they can help answer. I think just slightly, the first question that's come in, as always, is to do with money. That's almost inevitable. So just to ask a question, you've mentioned lots of opportunities for grant funding. So just sort of leading on from that, where can people find out more about all the funding opportunities? And amongst them, is there any funding that would help develop the local tree strategies? So I don't know whether that's Nicola or Naomi who'd like to pick up on that one. Where can people find out about all the different funding ops, and is there any for development?
Yes, so it's probably best for me to answer that one. So there should be relevant links actually in the toolkit, and there's very good information on the Forestry Commission website about the different funding opportunities that are available. In terms of specific funding for the development of strategies, there isn't a specific offer on that. However, that was one of the reasons for the development of our Woodland Creation Accelerator Fund, which is aimed at boosting capacity in local authorities for this kind of work. So one of the things that it might help is in the production of tree strategies. I appreciate that that isn't available to everybody and that it was a competitive process. And I saw that there's another question further down about whether we'll be opening WCAP again in the next financial year. I can't make any promises on that just yet, but it is something that we're proactively considering at the moment.
And there's also a question there about the Levelling Up Park Fund and whether that's still open. Is that something that...
I don't know the answer on that one, I have to say. I don't know whether any of my team are online and happen to know.
So I think what we'll do is questions like that, we'll undertake that we can find out answers and respond later if we can't give an immediate answer now.
My team have just told me it's closed, unfortunately.
Okay.
It was open over the summer.
Great. there was an apology from one part from Di Shepherd, actually, who apologised she hadn't yet had time to read the toolkit, but asks, have Defra and Natural England communicated with each other around the toolkit? Don't know who would be who would like.
Probably me again, I would have thought.
Yep.
I mean, we usually do. We've got a very good relationship with our trees colleagues in Natural England. But I don't know for definite, so I'm hoping someone in my team might tell me. But normally we do collaborate very closely with Natural England, Forestry Commission, and people in my core Defra team. So it's there's usually good interaction. So I would hope so.
I can see that from our Tree Council team responses, actually, that the answer is yes. So that's obviously John and Claire and Jess have been very involved, and they obviously have clocked that one, so that's great. I mean, one of the questions is, what do the expert panel see as the main benefits of having a tree strategy? And I think, Carolyn, perhaps you'd like to kick off, as Surrey County Council have sort of in a very practical way have had to decided to do that. What are the main benefits for you?
I think it's, I mean, I said quite a bit of in my intro. I think it's really helpful to have a tree strategy, so it's evidence-based, so you know what you're doing. And I was just looking at a couple of the comments, and it does move you away from that numbers game, because we are driven, well, not everybody is driven, but quite a lot of counties are driven by numbers, because members will make a commitment, will print X trees, they won't say we'll increase by X canopy. So having the strategy there allows us to say, this is how we're going to achieve it. However, there are other things than just tree numbers. So it is about that tree establishment. It's about, you know, moving things forward. It's about hedgerows, and it's transparent to have that discussion around ash dieback as well. So we are taking trees down and we're leaving those to regenerate, but we are replacing in other areas. So it really allows you to tell a story, which sometimes can get hijacked by the numbers game, and it shows you the longer term picture. And very much so, it allows other partners to engage, because we collectively, and I say that collectively across Surrey, have planted a lot of trees, but a lot of those have been by our partners, and it recognises the really important role of local authority partners, businesses, landowners, tree wardens, communities in doing this, and it really kind of puts a focus on us all to bring us together. So that collective action, I think, for me, is key.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I'm just going to give the final word before we move on to the sort of part two, just to Nicola, to ask you what you feel are the for you, you know, just highlight a couple of really key benefits you think of having a tree strategy.
Yeah, well, building on what Carolyn has said, it's so important to have a vision for what the trees are going to be, what species to plant, and what their function and purpose is going to be. And I think particularly where we've had diseases like ash dieback, and it's having a real impact on local treescapes, it's having a vision for the future and saying, well, some of those ash trees will survive because they'll be tolerant, some will regenerate, but what else is going to replace them, and what can provide the functions that those trees might have had previously, and how can we make sure that what is planted for the future will be there for you know, hundreds of years and really fulfill the purpose for which the community want them.
Thank you. That's great. I would say a big thank you to Naomi and Nicola and Carolyn. And we're going to move on now to part two. So if you can turn your cameras off. I know everyone is very keen to learn more about the practicalities of developing a toolkit. So I'm going to hand over now to John Stokes, who's the Tree Council's Director of Tree Science and Research, who's going to take us through the toolkit and its key features. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to now lead the next bit of this discussion and focus on the toolkit and how it's been created and its aims in trying to help you with developing your own local tree strategies. So let's give a little bit of context. The purpose that we all collectively see of these tree strategies are an opportunity to create some sort of shared local vision. And we know that there are lots of existing strategies, biodiversity strategies, wider land use strategies, climate strategies out there. And there's also those local nature recovery strategies that you're all going to have to develop over the next few years. So where does a tree and woodland strategy sit in relation to all those other things? And we see collectively, we see a tree and woodland strategy sitting at the heart of many of these different policy areas, many of these different policy briefs that are out there, and a way to facilitate gathering of evidence and setting and delivering of targets to bring together knowledge and experience through partnership working, and particularly to galvanize political support and some budget allocation. We know that this is something that many of you have already got, and about a third of local authorities already have some sort of tree strategy. But that means 2/3 of you don't, and even the third of you that do, there are many different variations on what a tree strategy looks like. So what we've tried to do with the toolkit is to provide a baseline that starts to give people some common thought about how a tree strategy might be developed, to empower and to enable local authorities to create your local strategies. And to do that, we decided that collectively the research told us that what we needed to do was to produce some sort of go-to document that signposted useful resources so that we could share solutions and to support you all at various stages of the journey of creating your strategies, of delivering them and reviewing them, and to spark new conversations and learnings about the process of managing your treescape strategically. We know that many of you have thought about these things in the past, but as you've heard from Naomi, there are new monies, new resources, new opportunities out there that we need to be harnessing. And as Carolyn said, it's about finding the ways and the spaces that you can use the opportunities that are out there and the trees that are available. But this isn't just about the planting of the trees. This is also about the maintenance of the aftercare and the long-term vision that you have for your treescapes, because we know that they're all different. And one of the questions that was asked earlier was, is this regional or local? I think there are elements of tree strategies that are very local, almost down to the parish level, but they might be district or county based. And there will come a point at which some regional conversations need to take place. But having the toolkit, we hope, will give you the capacity to reflect that diversity of local authority contexts and your needs. The journey in creating this toolkit has been a process of some 2 years. And it has been a team partnership between, as you've heard from Nicola and the others, from Fera Science, from Forest Research, from ourselves at the Tree Council. And that core team have worked together over the last few years in partnership with a whole range of other different organisations. This has been, from our perspective, Tree Council's perspective, the most cross-departmental work that we've done, and has brought in DLUC, the Forestry Commission, Department for Transport, Natural England, some of you were referring to earlier. It's also had a technical steering group that has been involved with the Defra departments and the Forestry Commission and some of those agencies that sit within Defra, such as Forestry Commission, for example. And then it has had huge engagement with local authorities, particularly tree officer groups, some of the non-governmental organisations out there that are involved in this sphere of work, and a whole range of the sector organisations that have been part of the journey alongside us over the last few years. What we know, however, is that many of you have some sort of existing documents. Many of you have some form of existing tree and woodland strategy. So we're not suggesting that those are no longer appropriate. What we're suggesting is that the world is changing, and that those of you that got one of those that you haven't, we need to be looking again at our frameworks, our strategies, and make sure that they reflect the changing world that we've got and the way that trees matter more to the environment, more to people, more to the communities. It shouldn't be a numbers game, and it shouldn't be all about climate change. There are so many other drivers for trees at the moment, from biodiversity to a whole range of other considerations. But we need to learn how to use trees to best effect as a community. And this toolkit is a vehicle to enable us to do that, and for you, we hope, to journey with us together, because today isn't the end of this journey. This is the beginning of the journey that we've been on. And that journey has, as set out in this slide, has lasted for 2 years already. Because what we needed to do was to have a research-led document. So we've had lots of conversations with so many of you over the last couple of years to determine how and what you really needed to make this tree strategy work, or your local tree strategies work. I'm just having a minor worry that I've not turned my microphone on, but that's the way these things happen. I'm sure somebody would have screamed at me by now if you couldn't hear me.
We can hear you, John.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's the worry of running these things and having multiple screens. It does make you have heart failure occasionally. So over the last 2 years, we have been working with local authorities and others. We had all sorts of initial scoping. We did research interviews and workshops. We've done drafts. We revised them. We've had critical review. We've had a design stage and a whole range of process that has brought us to today and to the launch of this toolkit. But during that process, some of you have told us we've put too much information in, and some of you have told us we didn't put enough information in. And nothing is ever perfect. But what we've tried to do is pull together as much of the resource as we can find, and case studies and thought, to give everybody something to work with and to get started. And the toolkit itself, rather like your strategies, is the start of a journey. And we're going to be amending and updating the toolkit as we learn more from you and as you learn more from each other over the next few years. So this is really, as I said, the start of the journey. We've put on our website a whole list of the existing strategies that we're aware of that might give you some further inspiration and ideas. And there are some that we've highlighted in the toolkit through case studies that will help you with particular points and allow you to dig into more detail. But this is the most interesting bit. Today is the start of the next part of the journey. It's where all this theory gets turned into practice. And the next couple of years, the team will be working to assess and refine and evaluate what we've produced and make sure that it helps you to get your strategies up and together. And that evaluation and learning is one that we see very much as a community. We want you to be part of the journey with us so that we can build a network across tree strategies that we hope will link up, and eventually we will have sort of tree strategies, local tree strategies across the whole country that tie in with the national strategy that has been developed. You can get the toolkit from the Tree Council website, and I'm sure Don will put in the chat the link if you haven't already got it. There are two forms of the document. There's a long version with lots of content for practitioners and people working on it. There's also a short version, 5 or 6 pages, which is designed for the politicians to help with, and other decision makers to help with a short form of why a tree strategy might be useful. And you can also access the information off the Defra homepages of their website. So you can get to it from lots of different ways. And the core of the toolkit has a whole range of information, but it's primarily there with 3 key stages, which is how to get started, how to develop your strategy, and how to deliver your strategy. And in that space, there are lots of resources and links to help people to develop their tree strategies as they go forward. And if you have a look at the content, hopefully it will give you lots of the information that you will need to develop your strategies going forward. And as a very core part of the strategy, of the toolkit, sorry, there are lots of case studies where we have talked to partners around the country who have been doing their own tree strategies, developing thought and ideas, with some key ideas to give you some some help and maybe some inspiration from some of the others. And so as the case studies are such an integral part of the toolkit itself, we thought it only right and proper that we ask a selection of the case studies to today's meeting. So I would like, perhaps, if you could turn your cameras on, folks, to be joined by Surrey County Council, to be joined by Fera Borough Council, and to be joined by Leeds City Council. Hello, everyone, who are going to now give you a bit of a flavour of their tree strategies. And I'm delighted to welcome Glenn Gorner from Leeds City Council, Camilla from Surrey County Council, and Paul Johnson from Fera Borough Council, who are going to tell you a little bit about their tree strategies and the values they have to their organisations. So Glenn, I'm going to hand over to you, if that's all right.
Okay, thanks, John. If you can show the first slide, that would be helpful. Next slide, please. Right, I'll just put this into context. Oh, by the way, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. But just before I move into some detail on Leeds' tree strategy and our experience, it needs some context. Leeds is part of the White Rose Forest, and the White Rose Forest is England's largest community forest, covering West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire. And the White Rose Forest as an entity has a plan, and that is basically to increase tree canopy cover across the whole region from current 11% to 19% by 2050. That, in context, is over 80,000 hectares. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Glenn, it's coming.
Okay. Now, this is a scientifically evidenced approach that we're taking here, and in line with the climate emergencies that most local authorities now have in place and strategies to combat those things, we commissioned University of Leeds and the charity United Bank of Carbon to create a carbon-led tree planting strategy. And this was based on quite detailed research into the amount of tree canopy cover that we would need in each part of the White Rose Forest to sequester the residual CO2, the residual atmospheric CO2, in relation to each district being a local authority, and in relation to their reduction in emissions by 2050. And so the residual CO2 is that bit that will be left over once we all succeed, hopefully, to reduce our emissions to stated targets. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, good.
Now, it's not just woodland creation. This is, as other speakers have mentioned as well, it includes trees in urban areas, peri-urban areas, as well as rural areas. And interestingly, it includes the understanding the contribution that trees outside woodlands bring to the piece. Next slide, please. Now, each district has information from the university and the United Bank of Carbon to highlight, first of all, the current tree canopy cover of each district. Leeds is currently 17.1%, and the figures are broken down to each of the 33 wards. So we know which wards have got most tree canopy cover and which have got less. Next slide, please. A similar breakdown has been provided for all of the other regions and districts within the White Rose Forest. So the area of the slide, it was the first iteration of this, where we looked at the 5 West Yorkshire authorities, plus York, Selby, Harrogate and Craven. Next slide, please. North Yorkshire as an entirety now has joined the White Rose Forest, and that involved the addition of 13 local authorities to the 5 West Yorkshire authorities. Of course, North Yorkshire is now going through a process of becoming a unitary authority, and that should all be completed quite soon. Next slide, please. The White Rose Forest created the White Rose Forest Action Plan from 2021 to 2025, and that was published last year, last November, and launched by the West Yorkshire Mayor. The ambition there was to increase tree canopy cover across the region by 3,500 hectares by 2025. The 2025 plan is in line with the England Tree Action Plan. The next phase of this, of course, is to create a white rose forest plan from 2025 to 2050. Next slide, please. Each district, each local authority is creating their own forest plan. And the White Rose Forest Strategy for Leeds was launched in 2020. And this provides a nuanced and detailed approach for our local authority to show how we will contribute to the targets set by the larger White Rose Forest. And I think it's worth saying that we have some interesting figures. We know in Leeds, for instance, that there's pretty much a 50-50 split between canopy cover provided by woodlands and canopy cover provided by trees outside woodlands. Our aim by 2050 is to increase our canopy cover from just over 17% to 33%. Now that's quite a tall order. Next slide, please. Whilst it's a carbon-led approach, and the council have committed to planting, or they aim to plant 50 hectares of new tree canopy cover every year up to 2045, it is a tall order, as other speakers have mentioned. Initially, it's great. You're up and running because you've got the land. We're committing to plant on council-owned land and working well using the various funding streams to unblock blockages and so on and so forth to identify that land and to fast track it into the process. It's a design-led process. And that design-led process means that whilst it's carbon-led, because we can measure the carbon and we can measure what we need to do to mitigate that carbon, it is actually a multi-purpose thing. Next slide, please. We mustn't forget that actually it's not just a tree thing. It does involve communities, it does involve education, it does involve health and well-being. Next slide, please. It does involve identifying natural flood management and naturalized flood management interventions. I say naturalized because in truth, most of our best interventions are actually engineered. It's just that we try to design them in a way that they look natural. So the top left-hand picture, for instance, is a flood attenuation pond, which worked perfectly on Boxing Day 2015. At the moment, it's pretty dry, but it was full of water and stopped those houses from getting their toes wet. In fact, that's the bottom slide, just underneath it. Next slide, please. Biodiversity is a major important role for all of us. There is a biodiversity emergency as well as a climate emergency, although the two pretty much go hand in hand. And we've got problems with ash dieback, as we all know, and has been alluded to. And also, we've also got another potential conflict, and that's biodiversity net gain. And our strategy tries to identify ways where we work well with biodiversity net gain, and we don't have a conflict for land for one use for biodiversity and another use for woodland creation. The two need to be seamless and they need to come together. Next slide, please. Green Streets is a major programme within the White Rose Forest region, and that's where we encourage green-blue infrastructure being incorporated into the design stage of highway development, and indeed even the retrofitting of green-blue infrastructure into existing highway infrastructure. But there are wonderful opportunities to green our highway development, and moving forwards, it gives us a particularly important picture. And as an example, in Leeds, for instance, we have over 60,000 highway trees and counting. So, to develop a strategy that provides a focus on that is really important. Now, John, I'm going to have to bail out for another meeting very soon. So I thought I'd just throw in the thing that I think I've learned from this strategy and the thing that I think is really important. I think in Leeds, we found that a strategic approach has enabled us to respond quickly and in detail to the major funding opportunities that Naomi's referred to and maximise on our delivery. And it's been wonderful to see some freeing up of some of the bureaucracies with those funding streams, and we've been able to move quickly and implement and maximise what we do. So thank you, Naomi, and your team. It's been brilliant. And that's it from me, John.
Thank you, Glenn. So we'll now pass to Camilla.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. So I work at an officer level underneath Carolyn, our Director for Environment, who you heard from a little earlier. And I just want to go through with you exactly what we found beneficial in terms of having a policy and a strategy in place for our trees and woodlands. Next slide, please. So in Surrey, we had a political commitment to plant 1.2 million new trees. And that was a net target, so net of all of our felling. And what we really wanted to do at county council level is make sure that we were placing the right value on our green infrastructure, leading by example, and not just doing the numbers game that we've referred to earlier, making sure that we've got the right tree in the right place and that nothing's planted without the effective planting and aftercare strategy in place. And what we really needed to maximise in order to reach our quite high target is partnership working with all of our landowners and stakeholders. And what this tree and woodland strategy has enabled us to do is have that really top-down approach. Next slide, please. So ideas of where we've planted in Surrey. We've opened up memorial trees, which we've done in certain areas within Surrey. As well as that, we're working on a COVID memorial with East Surrey Hospital, and we're hoping that we will be able to plant a tree for every person who lost their life to COVID-19. As well as that, we're looking at small woodland glades, community orchards to really feed into our food resilience strategy, local food for schools, and the education side of things, and really using our tree planting to mobilise volunteers from the local community. We run a schools offering every year using the fantastic local authority Treescapes Fund. And we've done that 2 years now, and it's been incredibly successful. We are in over 60 schools this year planting, which has been a really good news story for us. We're looking at riverine and existing woodlands, expanding natural flood resilience, and we're also focusing heavily on hedgerows and restoring historic landscape and our highway trees. As well as bolstering our tenant farmers habitat connection, and also as a byproduct their stewardship grants and making sure that they receive elevated grants. It's been incredibly useful. We also run tree giveaways at different points in the planting season, and that means that our residents get to take a little piece of our tree strategy home with them, and they get to plant in their own gardens. And we tend to use very garden-friendly species and crab apples, cherry blossoms, etc. And that's been really useful as a stakeholder management exercise and to communicate with our residents about what we're doing. Next slide, please. So in terms of our progress to date, I'll break this down in terms of our tree planting this year, but our tree and woodland strategy has fed in, it's almost, if you'll excuse the pun, the roots of everything that we do. And this season, it's meant that in terms of our tree planting, we're working with over 100 partners, including charities, community groups and schools. We are planting 57,500 trees ourselves this year with our partners and independently. We've been able to recruit using the Woodland Creation Accelerator Fund. We've been able to advertise for 2 new volunteer coordinators that are going to coordinate all of these community works. We've planted community orchards, and there are more coming this year, where we get to bolster the school supply of fruit and feed into that food strategy that's so important for all of us. Very great news story for us was that we've obtained just under £450,000 worth of grant funding this year through the wonderful schemes that have been run by Forestry Commission and Defra. And we're hoping that we can keep bidding on those and keep winning money through those competitive bids in order to bolster our planting. So all of that feeds into our overall strategy in terms of planting, which is net. But what I'd also like to say is that everything transformational that we're doing as part of this also is underpinning our BAU activities around tree risk management, our land management, the ecology and access around our land, and also a really proactive approach to ash dieback, which I'm sure, like many of you, it has been absolutely devastating for Surrey's landscape and will continue to be so. And it has meant having this strategy means that we can underpin everything we're doing. And it gives us a very good strategic approach to all of those things. Next slide, please. These are just a few pictures of some of our community events that we've been doing. We've engaged with tree wardens, local tree groups, community groups. We've also worked with Surrey ethnic minority groups and low-income families to make sure that we're really pushing the sort of greener agenda and the mental health and well-being side of tree planting. If you go to the next slide, please, there's just some more pictures of some of the community events that we've been doing, and they've been really successful. And we also work very closely with our community partnerships, which has been really great in terms of not only the well-being and support, but also the stakeholder management. But probably most importantly for us is that really expensive aftercare with tree planting. And what we're doing is we're managing to keep costs as low as possible and utilize these volunteers that want to do everything for the trees. And next slide, please. And next slide, please. This is the most enthusiastic library assistant in Surrey, and this is one of our giveaways where we give away trees to residents. They have been so popular, and if anyone isn't doing them currently, I would absolutely recommend it. It's a great way to reach your residents. Next slide, please. If anyone does have any questions, our email address is just there, and that'll go through to my tree officers. And we thought we'd leave you with my senior woodland officer's favourite tree. It's in Tilford in Surrey. It's the Tilford oak. And William Cobbett himself called it by far the finest tree, and it is still standing beautifully today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Camilla. And now we'll pass to Paul.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm the Principal Tree Officer based in Fera, right down in South Hampshire. So we're a coastal borough. We've got a coast that opens up onto the Solent, just north of the Isle of Wight. Southampton, situated to the west of us, on the other side of the River Hamble, and Portsmouth to the east of the borough. Next slide, please, John. So I'm the Principal Tree Officer. I head up a very small team, another tree officer and an assistant, tree assistant or assistant tree officer. My section is actually based in the Department of Planning and Regeneration. So I'm with development management and the planning policy officers. We split it into three main areas. The team deals with protected trees, so tree preservation orders, trees in conservation areas, and the processing of any tree work application or notification that relates to all those trees. Trees and development, so being situated in the planning section is I think a really good place for a tree team and tree officers to be. I get consulted on all applications that can have an impact on trees, from small extensions, householder applications, right up to bigger schemes. But I think one real advantage for us is the planning policy officers are just on the other side of the office. So in terms of our development strategies and our housing delivery, I have officers there that will talk to my team, on a weekly or daily basis in terms of, those areas that are coming up for new housing and the delivery of those housing sites, new landscaping conditions, how we can secure new planting through the development process. And the other half of the service is the management of council trees. So all trees on council land, parks, open spaces, cemeteries, and our woodland sites, which are also managed by our countryside ranger service. We don't deal with the public highway. That's our partners at Hampshire County Council. Next slide, please, John. So one thing John sort of asked me perhaps to look at is our tree management, or this council, Fera Borough Council's tree management journey. And I've described it very simplistically there, I guess, as sort of liability to asset management. Prior to 2005, this council had basically a reactionary process to its trees. There was one tree officer based in planning, and in terms of parks and open spaces, their approach to trees was really sort of looking at them, reacting to inquiries and problems through the parks officers and to some degree through our grounds maintenance service. In 2005, the council identified that trees were its most significant risk. And that basically generated the process of, through our insurers, if we needed to do more than just react, we needed to start to have a defendable system in place, a system of inspecting our trees. So we could obviously be in a more defendable position in terms of the risks those trees posed. That process started through 2005 and secured the various funding required, and a full audit of our trees undertaking in 2007. What that initial looking at risk and that process, or having identified that trees are a risk, led us to be able to sort of start focusing on the bigger picture in terms of trees. Of course, they're a risk, but they're an asset, and they also provide many benefits. So in 2010, I was fortunate enough to get the position of principal tree officer, heading up a tree team. Our chief executive had already determined that he wanted what he called a one-stop shop for trees at the time, and have one tree team. So that was my post of principal tree officer, the tree officer post from planning, and also identified we needed some assistance. We needed someone to log inquiries and do a lot of the background systems. EasyTree was one of the systems we were using to manage our trees. And in 2012, we had a very short window. We managed to get our first tree strategy through the council to try and look at the bigger picture of tree management, part of which is tree risk management, but also the purpose of having trees, the benefits they provide, how we should be managing them effectively, particularly in terms of our communities and the benefits those trees provide. So in 2012, we got that strategy through. That was initially a 5-year plan. It's actually was extended for another 5 years. This service went through a review just before COVID and was stalled and was completed at the end of 2021. And the new strategy is currently written and produced, and we're hoping to get that to our executive this spring for another 10-year plan. Next slide, please, John. Oh, I've jumped forward a bit, John, sorry. Should be another one after that, John.
That's the next one I've got, Paul.
Oh, is there one after that? I think I've got the wrong order.
No, that's your last one, and this one is your last one.
Okay, I sent through. Okay, sorry, apologies. I sent through 5. Okay, slide that's missing. In terms of the benefits of a tree strategy, it's certainly our initial tree strategy. It enabled us to set out the council's responsibilities, our direct responsibilities for trees, and sort of setting those out in the context of the council as well, and others competing services and demands for resources. We then, obviously, on the basis of once we'd established what we should be doing and what would more sort of, at that time, I'm talking sort of 2010, more aspirational things to do in terms of raise the profile of trees in the council at corporate level. We need to determine the resources and finances that were required. Obviously, that's already covered in the toolkit that's now available to everybody, and that's really quite important because they're going to be pressures between what you obviously have to do. Inspecting trees for risk is one of them, and other policy requirements for trees that you want to meet. But obviously the resources and the finances that your authority have are going to guide that. Understanding your tree population, well, that was one thing that the tree risk management process enabled us to do. We had to survey, inspect not all the trees we have, but those trees in our parks and open space and amenity areas, and that enabled us to work out various things like our species, proportions of species, their age and life stage, and that was really useful in terms of looking at how we might manage risks depending on size and age of trees, and also start to be able to consider the impacts of pests and diseases, which obviously in the 10 years since 2012, many of those have become more we were aware of those, and even some of them, particularly ash dieback, is probably the most significant one that's impacted on this borough. Thankfully, we haven't seen some of the other pests and diseases that may well be there in other parts of the United Kingdom and affecting some of you who are listening today. And it provides a framework for decision making. So it was the council had a greater awareness of trees, and having that tree team, what they were there to do, and those decisions, then you've got a consistent way of dealing with decisions within the council, within your elected members, and also a consistent approach as far as the public are concerned as well. One real benefit for us with particularly the first strategy, in terms of that jump it took from never having a strategy at Fera before, was just promoting the value and importance of trees, which I think I don't need to convince anyone of here, but certainly in terms of the management team in this authority, our members, all of which, you know, we're very aware, I think, and the public, to promote the value and importance of trees and the benefits they provide. I think that was probably one of the most significant benefits, certainly initially. I think certainly internally as an organisation, many different departments, heads of service and other sort of management areas of the council probably just quite saw trees quite simplistically. You know, well, they don't need much looking after, they do their thing, you know, but of course we know that's not true. They do need management, and sustainable management of your tree population needs that resource in place, a tree team, and some budgets to enable you to do that. And similarly, off the back of that, raising the profile of obviously the slide's missing, I apologise for that, but raising the profile of arboriculture and tree officers in general, in terms of those people, those experts who have that training and indeed that passion for trees, who can ensure that trees are managed effectively, and they can liaise and engage both internally with different departments, again with our members. That's a big thing we've done in this organisation, our local ward members, and again I think particularly the public and user groups, and some of the groups we already had through our range of service and volunteer groups. That sort of just raising that profile of what you can do if you've got a tree team in place, and you've got an organisation that's supporting that, and obviously the main support being a structure through a tree strategy document. And the final slide there, John, that you've got, again, I think that the most significant benefit leading from this strategy through to the new one is I think it's got to be tree planting for me. The awareness of not just managing and looking after what we've got, and in doing so accepting that that management results in losing trees. We're a borough that has a significant amount of a clay subsoil, so subsidence has always been a spectre in this borough, if I can use that term, and certainly 18, 19 and 20, after very dry years, we've had to lose some quite significant council trees and protected trees because of subsidence. So the potential for trees to be lost, ash dieback again has been a big impact on this borough since 2015. So the importance of accepting that tree management also means you're losing trees, to protect tree populations and to protect the public. Tree planting is so important, and I think the understanding of tree planting and the maintenance of those trees is something that everyone is far more aware of in the council. Even the work we do with our grounds maintenance in-house staff who cut the grass, challenge of ensuring that trees aren't damaged. This is the Jubilee Avenue of Queen Elizabeth, a field maples that was planted in 2012. This photo was taken last summer. I think one of the biggest benefits for us has been that promoting of not just tree planting, but the maintenance afterwards, so water and mulching, to ensure those trees become established, and sort of 10 years on, this avenue of trees, I guess, sort of demonstrates that in terms of they are pretty much established now for the future, and to provide all those benefits that new trees will provide our communities. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. We were going to go to a questions, but we're right up against time, folks. So I'm just going to ask the two of you to I'm just going to stop sharing. In one sentence, could you just reiterate what you both see as the key value of a tree strategy to your local authority?
So for Surrey, it's very much around a coherent approach that's aligned with our corporate values, knowing what we want to achieve and knowing what doesn't add material value as well. So just as important as it is to be clear about what you want, it's really clear for us to avoid the scope creep that can inevitably come in when we're looking at all of our woodland management, pests and diseases, and having this one overarching alignment to our corporate values just takes us right back to the point every time, and helps us align those multiple benefits that we're stacking from one programme.
Okay, thank you, Camilla. Paul?
Yeah, again, sort of jumping on the back of Camilla, I'd agree the same. I mean, one of our long-standing corporate values is protecting, enhancing the environment, and trees. You know, clearly, trees and woodlands, you know, they support that and are a significant part of ensuring that objective can be achieved. And just getting that council buy-in, what we achieved back in 2012 was a significant increase in the awareness of trees, what's required to look after them, and then the benefits that flow from that. So I think that corporate buy-in and making sure it does link with you know your corporate objectives, which I say thankfully with that protecting and enhancing the environment already there, then trees, you know, they naturally fitted into that. We just had to set out how and why, and I guess justify that through having a tree team in place and a tree strategy document.
Yes, thank you both. And from our perspective, although obviously there's a big funding focus at the moment around tree planting, for us the whole TAWS process is not just a tree planting strategy. It's a strategy that is focused on that whole strategic oversight of the treescape, and it's about, you know, finding different ways of using this process to build up all the different things from your goals on extent, on connectivity, on condition, and on diversity of your tree stock, not just about tree planting. And there have been questions being posed about tree health and risk management, and they are key themes for us. There may not have been quite as much information in the toolkit as some of you might have liked, but that's because this has been a topic that's been there for a while, and we can build up that element of the toolkit over time if this is seen as being an important resource. But there are lots of resources in the toolkit that's referred to in Appendix E, if you look at the back, that starts to go into some of this detail. So thank you both. And what we're going to do now is we are just going to hand over to my colleagues Jess and Jen, who are going to talk us through the last bit of the equation, which is what happens next. So may I introduce Jen Clements from Fera Science and Jess Allen from the Tree Council, who are going to just take us through the last bit of the discussion.
Could you bring the slides up, please, John?
Oh, sorry, I thought I had. On my screen, they're up.
Okay.
Apologies. I've just got to work out how to do that, Jen.
That's okay.
Because I've now managed, by the wonders of modern technology, to lose the window I need to do that. Whoops.
While we were waiting, I will say I'm joining
from
from York, and it's been lovely to see how many members of local authorities from York and Yorkshire have been present in the chat. Great representation.
Right, apologies. There you go.
Great. If you go on to the next slide immediately.
Okay.
I believe I'm kicking us off before we hear from Jess. So I'm going to talk, John has spoken a little bit about the kind of development and research journey so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming next. So Fera is a research agency, which is how we're coming at this and why we're involved. So having
a complete meltdown.
No, it's okay, it's working, John. So as John kind of alluded to before, this research journey began in 2018 when we began, the kind of working group began looking into tree strategies of various forms. So what was already out there, they're called by various names, so from tree plans to tree policies to tree strategies. So what was already out there and what form did they take in place? So for example, were they broad in scope or were they narrow and focused on, say, risk management? And how prolific were they and how were they being used? And this is what informed the development and the decision to create a toolkit in the first place. And that kind of working relationship with various LAs has continued. And now that the toolkit has been produced, we're more than aware that it's not a final finished document. What I mean by that is that it's never going to be perfect, but there's still clear room for development. And that's where you come in. So we're quite keen to evaluate the toolkit as it already stands and look into, is it being used, how is it being used, and how can it be improved? You might be familiar with how this process works from the work that Tree Council, Forest Research and Fera have done on the ash dieback toolkit, for example. So the guidance on that was produced, but research activities have continued since publication to add new modules, to develop some aspects of it, and things of that ilk. So to structure this evaluation, social scientists use what's called a theory of change. You can see a simplified version of this on the screen. The full version is an absolute mess of interconnections, as they often are. But essentially, a theory of change is just a fancy way of saying that we've tried to map out the relationships between an intervention, i.e. in this case, the TAWS toolkit, its impact and its potential, especially desired outcomes, which you can see here mapped across the screen. An important caveat here is that some of the longer term outcomes, such as the impact of having guidance on TAWS on the treescape, are not realistically going to be measurable in the next couple of years, which is what the current funded span of this work covers. So the initial focus is going to be on the extent to which the toolkit is being used, how it's being used, and what's happening as a result of this, with potentially some work looking at what existing TAWS have led to in their local contexts. So at this point, I'll pass on to Jess to talk more about how you can get involved, but I'll be around at the end to answer any questions about the kind of research process and activities going forwards.
Thanks, Jen. John, can you go to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. So yes, there's a few ways that you can all start to get involved from today. Firstly, and most obviously, we hope that you'll all start to use the toolkit, share it with your colleagues, and please do let us know if you have any feedback. As Jen said, we'll be trying to keep it updated, and it's really useful to hear directly from you what you'd like to see in it. And another way to get more actively involved is to join us at one of our regional workshops, which we'll be holding as a research team over the next few months. And there's more details on that coming up in a second. And those workshops will help us to unpack the toolkit in a lot more detail than we can today, and to explore how tree strategies work in practice and how they interact with other emerging policy as well. And we want to get a really good mix of local authorities there. So whether you're a county, a district, a borough, or a city, whether you have a tree strategy or not, you've all got an important role in the process. So please do come along. And we know that there's a huge wealth of knowledge and enthusiasm out there, which we're really keen to bring together and grow an active support network of local authorities. And we're open to ideas about how that might work. And that's something we'll talk about at the workshops. So it might be that we facilitate some regular online meetings, for example, a kind of self-help group that allows you to exchange ideas and to sort of learn together. So we're looking forward to getting your suggestions about what would work for you. And that will help us track progress and gather more case studies as well over time. And finally, on this slide, we know that there's lots of existing networks that are highly relevant to tree strategies out there, for example, local nature partnerships or community forests. And while we do have links with many of them, if you've got any other ideas about how we can collaborate, then please do let us know. Next slide, please, John. There you go. So we hope that lots of you will come and join us at the workshops. They should be interesting, they should be constructive. And we want to hear from you about your plans for your treescapes. I'm sure there'll be some cake provided as well, so hopefully that can entice you to come along, have a chat with us, and to meet others in your area. Although if you do all turn up, looking at the attendance today, I think we'll need to book some bigger venues. So that'd be a nice problem to have. Hopefully at least one workshop will be in a convenient location for everybody. So far we know, as it says on the slide, we'll be in Leeds on the 28th of February, we'll be in the National Forest on the 1st of March, and we're also planning an event in Surrey, and we'll be led by where the greatest demand is for the other events. So do get in touch. The best thing is to email myself. My email address is there, and that will help you to register your interest, and we'll get you on the list and make sure that you get the right information. Last slide, please, John. I think, so yeah, this slide, I just think that we'd like to say a special thank you to the local authorities who spoke to us in such depth about your tree strategies, in particular the case studies, because you spent a lot of time with me and Jen over the last couple of years developing the case studies and sharing your knowledge really openly. So I just wanted to say a last thank you to you. And on that note, it's back to John, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess. So what we're going to do now is have a bit of an open Q&A for our remaining time. And if I could be joined by the folk that are coming back to answer some of the questions. So we've got Camilla, we've got Paul. We're going to be joined by Forest Research in the form of Bianca, I think is coming on, Lean. And then Elle from Defra, I think is coming too as part of this. Is there anybody I've forgotten else who was going to be part of this? So no, I think it's everybody. So we've got all the partners who were here in the creation of this, plus our 2 case studies. There are some general questions. There are some specific questions. We are not, folks, going to be able to deal with all of them in the time we've got available. We apologise for that, but we promise that we will look at them all, pick them up in the workshops, use them to help shape some of the information that we produce going forward. Camilla, there was a specific one with you, for you we'll start with, which was how many staff are delivering on your strategy on the ground?
So we've got, so I run the business as usual team and the program team for tree planting, because it's really important that we both look after our existing trees and establish our new ones. So I have 3 individuals working on our business as usual, tree management and ash dieback management. And they're my arboriculture officers, and then delivering our tree planting program. There is myself and 3 others. So we are delivering, we're a team of 7 to 8 people with some intermittent support.
Okay. And Ruth asked a question, if we were going to develop a truly inclusive tree, I think it was Ruth, truly inclusive tree strategy, how long do you think it might take all of you? Paul, how long did your tree strategy take to create? I know it's an ongoing process, but
yeah, the first one we had a small window, so I'd probably say it's about 18 months to sort of get it all together and get it various sort of the stages in here to get it to the executive. This time, because we've had the gap, so my service was reviewed through just before COVID, and that didn't complete to the end of 2021, which included us getting a good significant budget to manage ash dieback. That was probably a 2-year process, but I mean that's not that's not 2 years solid. That's the process of getting it back through my head of service, my director, portfolio holders, and that sort of back and forth. So you get it to a place where it's got that full support, and we're going to go to the executive obviously this spring to get the next 10-year, and it will be a 10-year plan, having all the work that's gone into it to get it, and also ongoing review is something we've built in more this time than the previous one, so it is updated regularly.
Camilla, roughly how long did it take you to produce yours?
So I came into post after they'd begun, but I would say a good estimate, if you were working or if you had someone pushing forward like a program manager on it, you could probably get something in place within 6 to 9 months. That would be a stretch, but it depends whether or not you want to go to cabinet, which we did choose to do just so that we could get the political support and the backing from our members.
And we all know that this is not going to be a short process, because designing something useful won't be. But all that research that we did over the couple of years, the time window was reflected by those 2 answers we've been given. Somewhere between 9 months and 18 months seems to be about the time period it would take. But that isn't all day, every day. That's just the various steps that you have to go through to develop it, make it inclusive, and get it through the political gatekeepers. In terms of what other questions here that we, in terms of how it should reflect landscape character and local distinctiveness, how do we all collectively think that these tree and woodland strategies should reflect their your local context? How, Bianca, you've done a lot of work in that space. How, don't look so shocked. But it's that element of how do we look at a treescape in the round?
I think it's probably fairer to ask Camilla and Paul about that, because they will have had to deal with that on a very practical level rather than me doing it from a more theoretical level. So I'm just going to bounce that back to Camilla and or Paul.
How do you get it to reflect your treescape in that round, Paul?
Yeah, and we had to look at the sort of the borough that we've got, this borough in the last 30, 35 years is like just a huge explosion of which you'll know, John, living in the borough, of primarily residential development and very green development. So we kind of know there's a legacy of the trees, trees and woodlands and areas of trees, a lot of the greenways that are associated with watercourses that were retained on development, became public open space and were transferred to the council. So in terms of managing those trees, the risk side, was important for us, because I think it was the first sort of trigger to get us to look at what we had, where it is and how it affects people. And very quickly we saw that from an arboricultural review, we had to sort of turn it to the benefit side. So it's managing that. It's looking at replacement trees. We have got some existing woodlands as well, and they've got different context across the borough. But also a lot of the tree and new landscaping deliveries through the planning process. So those new developments and sort of working with our urban design colleague in planning policy is another way we're looking at how we make sure that any new landscaping that we get through development process, which is quite important, is sort of fits with, albeit these fairly new and sort of modern developments that are coming forward.
Camilla?
I think for us, quite similar to you, Paul, the only thing that I would add to that is that we're working really intensively with our biodiversity net gain colleagues, with our local ecologists, our local forums, our local badger groups, bird groups, absolutely everyone, to see exactly what the parcels of land that we're going to plant on, what they need, what they require in terms of flood resilience, and what we actually want to achieve above a number of planted trees. And again, with our woodland management, it's very much around being sensitive to that local area and looking at how we restock, or how we whether we let natural regen take over. And I think that is just a huge stakeholder management exercise, and if you get the right people in the room, you get the right answers.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you all. Actually, because of the nature of the time, we overran a bit on some of the presentations, so we are, I'm afraid, out of time, and we know that many of you have other meetings that you need to go to, so we're going to close in just a few seconds. But I would like to, there was one question that was posed by Joanne Dick I guess in Scotland, who said, does the toolkit only apply to England, or does it not apply in Scotland? And from the Tree Council's perspective, although this was a piece of work that was commissioned primarily to look at England, we are hoping that what we've produced is as relevant in Scotland and in Wales and potentially in Northern Ireland as well. And one of our parts of the journey is to make sure that we reflect some of those differences that might exist in the four nations. It is primarily English in origin, but we are hoping it will be over time relevant to everybody, so that we're all working off the same sort of baseline. From all of those involved in the toolkit production, we thank you for listening this afternoon, and I'd like to pass back to Sarah, who's just going to close us out.
Thanks, John. Thanks very much. Just to say that nearly 300 of you joined us today, which is fantastic that there is such interest, and absolutely brilliant. So again, on behalf of Defra and Fera and Forest Research and the Forestry Commission, and also Team Tree Council, which is John, Jess and Claire, who've worked so hard with everyone else on the toolkit. Thank you so much again for joining us on the journey. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your feedback. We hope that you will join us at one of the workshops that was shown on screen. We'll circulate that again later, and we'll also circulate some answers to the questions that we couldn't answer when we've had time to collate them a little bit later. So thank you. Let's have many more tree and woodland strategies that make a positive, tangible difference for our treescapes and leave an incredible legacy for future generations. Thank you so much, everybody.